Alright, this is my Ezuri Claw Progress Commander deck tech. So Ezuri is a 3/3. So for 2 in Simic, you get a creature, an Elf Warrior. Whenever a creature power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, you get an experience counter. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put X +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control, where X is the number of experience counters you have. So essentially, Ezuri, you want to play a bunch of dorks that he turns into really big threats. So that's really the whole idea of this deck. So first up, we got our instants that I run in my deck. First up, we got Brainstorm. So Brainstorm's an instant for 1 blue, draw 3, put any 2 cards back from your hand on top. Very good to sort through, find stuff you need. Next, we got Pongify. So Pongify, 1 blue, destroy target creature, it can't be regenerated. They get a 3/3 ape. We don't really care that they get the ape. Usually you're killing something like an angel or something crazy and they get an ape. Next up, we got Bioshift. So Bioshift is actually a lot better than people think. When you have things like Simic Ascendancy out or whatever, when you move the counters around, like certain cards can like recognize that you're putting counters from one creature onto another. So this card's also a nice little combat trick, but there's a lot more to this card than it really appears. Next up, we got Snakeskin Veil. So for 1 green, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains hexproof. +1/+1 counter is relevant in the fact that it gives hexproof. We can protect the Ezuri from something or any of our other creatures that we're trying to save. Next, we got Counterspell. 2 blue, counter target spell. Commander, staple. Next up, we got Once Upon a Time. This card's very good. It's the first spell you cast this game. You may cast without paying its mana cost, so it's just a free card. You dig through the top 5, you get a free card. Look at the top 5 of your library. You get to reveal a creature or a land from among them. Put it into your hand. The rest on the bottom. Whatever you need, you get to grab it. Next, we got Mana Drain. So for 2 blue, you counter a spell. At the beginning of your next main phase, add that much colorless mana equal to that card's converted mana cost. Strictly better than counter spell. And the price tag is also, it lets you know it's better than counter spell. It's not cheap, but it's very good. Next, we have Disallow. This allows us to stop people from, casting something we don't want, or if there's a triggered ability that could really mess up what we got going, we can, counter that. So for 1 and 2 blue, counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. So it's pretty good. Next, we got Return of the Wild Speaker. So choose 1 target. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, which in this deck, with the Ezuri, we make things huge, so you get to draw a lot of cards. Or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3. So both are good. We're usually going to use it for the card draw, but because we go wide in this deck, the +3/+3 also can be relevant. But this card's very good. But we usually are going to use it for the card draw. Next up, we got our sorceries. So we got Serum Visions. So for 1 blue, draw a card, scry 2. Can't get this thing to focus. Draw cards, scry 2. Next up, we got Ponder. 1 blue, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put them back in any order. You may shuffle your library, then draw a card. It's very good. Next, we got Sylvan Scrying. So 1 and a green, search your library for a land card, reveal it, put it into your hand. This lets us get any sort of utility land, or if we need a blue or a green, whatever we need, just go ahead and grab that. Next, we got Neoform. This lets us tutor for any card we want. It also comes out with a +1/+1 counter, which is also relevant. Being able to tutor for specific cards, we run Sage of Hours, which if we're really trying to win through that route, we can just go ahead and grab him by sacking one of our little dorks. But Neoform's probably one of the better cards of the deck. But yeah, Neoform's very good. Also, the fact it comes in with a +1/+1 counter, very relevant. Another all-star in the deck is Eldritch Evolution. Same, essentially does the same thing, but a little better because it's X is 2 plus the converted mana cost or less, so you can sacrifice up or down. Both of those cards are absolutely insane. Next, we got the enchantments. So first up, we got Rancor. So for 1 green, enchanted creature gets +2/+0 and trample whenever it's put into the graveyard. So whenever it gets blown up or they kill the creature it's on, Rancor comes back to your hand. So it's pretty annoying. Lets our little guys that became big guys have trample. So lets us get through with them. Next, we got Hardened Scales. So if one or more +1/+1 counters will be put on a target creature, that many +1 is put on it instead. This card gets out of hand very quickly. It also is a lot better than it seems. That one extra counter can really add up over the course of a game. Next, we got one of our win conditions, Simic Ascendancy. So for a blue and a green, you get an enchantment that says pay 1 a blue and a green, put a +1/+1 counter target creature you control. So you can just dump mana if you have nothing else to play. Then it says when one or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many on Simic Ascendancy. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 more counters on Simic Ascendancy, you win the game. So in this deck, it's very easy to hit that 20 mark. It just makes it to where if there's fog effects or something where you just can't get through with your creatures, you have an alternate win condition. Next up, we got Hadana's Climb. This card's absolutely insane, and a lot of people who don't know it will learn very quickly after the first game that you lose to this card. For 1 a green and a blue, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then, if that creature has 3 or more +1/+1 counters, which, I mean, the whole deck is +1/+1 counters, so it's very easy to do that. It's going to flip when it comes out. Transform it. So, when you transform Hadana's Climb, it turns into Winged Temple of Orazka. So it taps for any mana of any color, and then for 1 a green and a blue, target creature you control gains flying and +X where X is its power. So if we made a 1/1, like a 12/12 with all the little +1/+1 counters, our 12/12 becomes a 24/24 with flying. So this card's very, very good. And if they don't have an answer for it immediately, it gets absolutely insane. Next we got Branching Evolution. This card's absolutely nuts as well. For 2 and a green, if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on it on a creature twice that many, so it's essentially a doubling season for +1/+1 counters, but it also costs 2 less to play. Branching Evolution's absolutely insane. You need to focus, but yeah, Branching Evolution is very good. Next, we're gonna move to our artifacts. So, first up, we got your standard Soul Ring. Pay 1, add 2. Next up, we've got the Ozolith. This card's absolutely busted. I don't know what they were thinking when they made this card, but essentially, we don't have to worry about getting blown out if one creature has all the +1/+1 counters on it, because the Ozolith's kind of like our backup plan. So if you drop like 20 counters on a creature and they kill it, I mean, you don't really care because all the counters get moved to the Ozolith, which next combat you move them on to something different. So essentially, they're just killing the creature instead of like solving the whole +1/+1 counter situation. Next, we have Arcane Signet. Two generic. You get to add a color of your commander's identity. Next, we have Swiftfoot Boots. So this is usually to protect Ezuri. Ezuri are a couple other problem creatures that might be better than Ezuri at the time. But usually we are gonna keep this on Ezuri. Next up we got Simic Signet, just a little mana ramp. 2, pay 1. It gives you Simic, so just kind of fixes your mana, adds 1. Next, we got Ronus's Monument. So for 3 generic green creature spells you cast, cost 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and trample. So this card's really good. The discount with the green is pretty great. But this is mostly in there for the trample. After we made the deck originally, trample was a problem or any sort of evasiveness. So this card kind of helped us get around it by, first of all, it discounted the creatures, but then it also gave our stuff trample. So pretty good card. Next up, we got the creatures. So first up, we got the Almighty Brushwag. This card's a lot better than it seems as well. Also, the backpack on the other thing, it's a 1/1 with trample. You can pay 4, so later in the game, if you have a lot of mana, you can pay 4 and give him +3/+3. He's very good because when we dump counters with Ezuri on him, he already has trample, and then he also can pump himself. So it's a good target to dump on with Ezuri just because he's got the trample. Next up, we got Glade Cover Scout. So for 1 green, you get a hexproof 1/1. It protects itself, and you don't have to worry about it dying from like spot removal. So you can dump all your counters on it without having to worry about them just like doom blading it or something. Next up, we got a little mana ramp. So Elvish Mystic, 1 green, tap, add 1 green to your mana pool. Just a solid ramp creature. We got Llanowar Elf, so it does the same thing. 1 green, taps for a green, 1/1. Arbor Elf, 1 green, untap target forest when you tap it. You know, sometimes we can get blue out of it, but usually it's just 1 green. Next up, we have Hex Drinker. This card's absolutely insane. 1 green for a 2/1 that you can level up. So when you level it up from level 3 through 7, it's protection from instants, which essentially is like hexproof. I mean, no one really runs sorcery speed removal spells. And then once it's level 8 plus, it has protection from everything. So this does include Ezuri, so you can't put counters on it after that. But I mean, at that point, it's well worth it. 6/6 protection from everything is already pretty good, and before then, I mean, you probably would have already dumped counters on it, so you don't really care. Next up, we got Thrumming Bird. So for 1 in a blue, it's a flyer. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. So it lets us pump our team. It also gives us a flyer that we can dump counters onto. Very good. Next, we got Invisible Stalker. So Invisible Stalker is 2 for a 1/1 hexproof and unblockable. This is probably, in my opinion, the best creature you could put anything on. The unblockable clause part is absolutely ridiculous, and it has hexproof, so it's not going to get killed. Can't be blocked, so you just keep dumping it on, and you just keep taking 1 player out at a time through Invisible Stalker. So Invisible Stalker is very good. Next, we got Collector Oof. For 2, you get a 2/2. Activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated, so no Soul Rings, no Mana Rocks, Mind Slavers, anyone trying to do anything crazy with artifacts. Oof says you can't do that. So just a little stacksy card just to keep some decks in check, but I mean, really, all these creatures are in here just to trigger Ezuri. I mean, every single creature for the most part, with the exception of like maybe 2 or 3, all trigger Ezuri. So a little Staxy also triggers Ezuri, so it doesn't really affect this. Next, we got Incubation Druid. So for 1 in a green, you get a 0/2. It taps for 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce, so it's going to be blue or green. When it has a +1/+1 counter on it, it adds 3 mana of that type instead. So you can adapt it for 3 and 2 green, so you can put 3 +1/+1 counters on it if it has no counters on it. So usually we're not gonna adapt. By the time this comes out, we'll have something to be able to give it a counter, so we can use it for tap for 3 when we need it to a lot quicker. But this card's very good. Turn 3, it taps for 3. Just solid card. Next we got Coiling Oracle. So for Simic, you get a 1/1 when it enters the battlefield to reveal the top card. If it's a land, put it onto the battlefield, otherwise draw it. A little bit of ramp sometimes, a little bit of card draw sometimes. Triggers Ezuri, it's not bad. Next we got Thieving Skydiver. This card's absolutely nuts. People still haven't caught on to it for whatever reason. 1 in the blue, you get a 2/1 flyer with kicker. The X can't be 0. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kick and control of target artifact with converted mana cost X or less, if that artifact is an equipment, attach it to Thieving Skydiver. So, for 3 mana, you get a 2/1 for 2/1 flyer, and you steal someone's Soul Ring. For 3 mana, you can steal their Mana Crypt. For 5 mana, you get steal their Sword of Feast and Famine, and it's equipped to Thieving Skydiver. This card's very good. It also, the flying part is very relevant. It's got a little bit of evasiveness. Next, we got Blighted Agent. For 1 in a blue, you get a 1/1 infect, can't be blocked. Just another mean way of ending games. You just dump 9 counters on it and just kill a player real quick. Whoever's your problem. Next, we got Scavenging Ooze for 1 a green. You get a 2/2 with pay a green, exile target card from a graveyard if it's a creature card. Put a +1/+1 counter on the Scavenging Ooze and you gain a life. The +1/+1 counterpart is very relevant, but this is mostly in there for keeping some graveyard decks in check and gaining a little bit of life. Next up is one of our consistent win conditions. For 1 in a blue, you get a 1/1 with Heroic. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Sage of Hours, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Remove all +1/+1 counters from Sage of Hours. For each 5 counters removed this way, take an extra turn. So when we have Ezuri out, these counters, the experience counters, don't go away. So if we have 6 counters on him, and we play Sage of Hours, we go to combat, put all the counters on Sage of Hours, and then go to combat, smack people or whatever, and then remove all the counters from Sage of Hours to take an extra turn, and then you just rinse and repeat. So next combat, all 6 again, go on Sage of Hours, and then you just essentially you go through your whole deck, you draw your whole deck slowly, and just kill everyone through combat. So, Sage of Hours is very good. If you're ever playing against Ezuri, you always have to be aware that they could drop that whenever. So you just have to be prepared for that. Next, we have Eternal Witness. 1 and 2 green for 2/1. When it enters, you get any card from your graveyard back to your hand. It's very good. Next, we have Trinket Mage for 2 and a blue. Whenever it enters battlefield, search your library for an artifact with converted mana cost 1 or less. Reveal that card, put it into your hand. This lets us grab Soul Ring or the Ozolith. Usually, we're going to grab the Ozolith unless we really need the ramp. Ozolith's just, in my opinion, strictly better in most situations just to protect your engine from getting blown out. Next, we have Jade Light Ranger for 1 and 2 green. You get a 2/1. When it enters, it explores and it explores again. So you reveal the top card of your library. If that card, put that card into your hand if it's a land. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So with things like Hardened Scales, when you do it the first time, you get 2 counters and then 2 counters again. Or if you have Branching Evolution, it just gets out of hand really quick. Next, we have Scoot Swarm. Scoot Swarm is absolutely nuts with Ezuri. Everyone hates Scoot Swarm, but it actually is very good in this deck with the synergy with Ezuri. For 2 and a green, you get a 1/1 insect. Whenever land enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 green insect, which will trigger Ezuri. If you control 6 or more lands, that token is a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. So, every single time this thing multiplies, it triggers Ezuri again. So, yes, this card's very annoying to play against, but in this deck, it actually does make a lot of sense to play it. Next up, we have Hull Breacher for 2 and a blue. Flash. If an opponent would draw a card except for the first one they draw on their draw steps, instead you create a treasure token. So this card will not trigger Ezuri. This is one of them, but this stops anyone from trying to, any sort of blue player trying to draw a million cards or wheel everyone out without everyone else trying to be able to draw, or any sort of oppressive, cantrippy, drawing a lot of cards deck. It just stops any sort of shenanigans. Next we got Kolai Selkie. So for 1 and hybrid, you get a 1/1 Island Walk. Whenever Cold Eye Selkie deals combat damage to a player, you may draw them any cards. So if this thing's a 4/4 and it hits someone, you draw 4 cards. This card is very good. You know, you can dump counters on it, draw a lot of cards if it connects, triggers them, and it's got Island Walk, which is pretty relevant in Commander. There's usually going to be a player with an island out, so essentially unblockable. Next we have Reclamation Sage. This lets us deal with any sort of artifact or enchantment that's annoying. So for 3, you get a 2/1. When it enters, you get to destroy an artifact or enchantment. You know, card's just good. Next we have Chasm Skulker. For 2 and a blue, whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Chasm Skulker. Whenever it dies, you create X 1/1 blue squid creature tokens with Island Walk onto the battlefield, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it. So this card gets absolutely nuts. With Ezuri out, we put counters on it, just keep dumping counters on it, and when this dies, it creates a bunch of little squids with Island Walk, and when all those squids enter, it triggers Ezuri again. So, Chasm Skulker is very good. We don't really care if it gets killed. I mean, sometimes it'll get exiled, which kind of sucks, because then you don't get the squids, but, that's just a risk you're willing to take. Marwyn the Nurturer, for 2 and a green, you get a 1/1 whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control. Put a +1/+1 counter on Marwyn. Tap it, add an amount of green equal to Marwyn's power. This card gets absolutely crazy and out of control. Also, for the most part, our deck runs a lot of elves. So on top of her getting +1/+1 counters from things, with the amount of elves we have, she's gonna get a lot of triggers, just growing. Next, we have Champion of Lambholt. This card is absolutely insane. For 1 and 2 green, you get a 1/1. Creatures power less than Champion of Lambholt can't block creatures you control, so it doesn't mean they can't block her. It's all your creatures. She doesn't even have to be attacking. So whenever another creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter champion. So if we have 7 counters, 7 experience counters from Ezuri, and we dump 7 on her, she becomes an 8/8. And then all of our creatures cannot be blocked by creatures that have power less than 8, which is absolutely nuts. Essentially, she gives all our stuff unblockable. It's literally probably one of the best cards in the deck. It's just ridiculous. Next, we have Herald of Secret Streams. Essentially does what the other card does, except literally gives them unblockable. So for 3 and a blue, you get a 2/3. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them can't be blocked. Just another game closer. Next, we have Vincer Shaper Savant. So for 2 and 2 blue, flash whenever it enters, return target spell or permanent to its owner's hand. So if there's a problem that someone resolves, or if we don't want it to resolve, we flash them in, triggers Ezuri, and we bounce something back. Or we could even, if we want to get triggers with Ezuri, we cast it, target itself, so Ezuri sees him enter, and then he bounces himself back. So you can just keep looping triggers that way. Next, we have Fathom Mage for 2 and Simic. You get a 1/1 with Evolve. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it has greater power than it, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on Fathom Mage, draw a card. So if we have 3 counters on Ezuri, we go to combat, put 3 counters on her, we get to draw 3 cards. So Fathom Mage is also very, very strong. Next up, we got Rashmi. So for 2 and a green and a blue, you get a 2/3. Whenever you cast your first spell each turn, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card with converted mana cost less than that spell, you can cast it without paying its mana cost. So another elf, like I was saying, but this card's very good. You play an instant on someone else's turn, you get to draw a card or play it for free. You start playing creatures, you get another creature for free, or you draw another card. Rashmi is very good. Next, we got Prime Speaker Vanifar. It's basically a birthing pod on a creature. It's also an elf, and it triggers Ezuri. So you can tap it, sacrifice another creature, search your library for a creature card converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrificed creature's converted mana cost. Put it onto the battlefield and activate it only as a sorcery. So it's literally a birthing pod on a creature. Next, we have Solemn Simulacrum. So for 4 generic, you get a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you get to search your library for a basic land, put it out tapped, and then when he dies, you get to draw a card. Triggers Ezuri, just pure value for creature. Next, we have our another pseudo commander. We have Master Biomancer. So for 2 in Simic, you get a 2/4. Each other creature you control enters the battlefield with a number of additional +1/+1 counters equal to his power. So you have to be careful playing this card with Ezuri because he will counteract Ezuri. So if he's out already, every creature you have that doesn't have power 0 will enter with the counters. So Ezuri won't see them a creature that's a 2/2 will enter with 2+1/+1 counters on it. So instead of it entering as a 2/2 and then getting 2 counters, it enters as a 4/4. That makes it to where Ezuri can't see that. So you don't get the trigger from Ezuri if he's out. But if you have like 7 counters already on Ezuri, each combat you just dump them on him, and then whenever you play a creature, they enter with 9+1+, like 2. So 2 from him, and then the 7. So he becomes a 9. 9/11. All your creatures enter with 9+1/+1 counters. So it's well worth it in the end. You just have to be careful with the timing of these two. Next up, we got Deep Glow Skate. This card looks absolutely beautiful, especially in person. I don't know if the camera does it justice. Can't really focus, but 4 and a blue, you get a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, double the number of any kind of counter on any number of target permanents. So it doubles all of your creatures +1/+1 counters. Um, it's a good card. It doesn't trigger Ezuri, but doubling everything's well worth it. Next up is my favorite card in the deck, Iridescent Hornbeetle. No one really understands how well this card works in this deck until they've played against it. So for 4 and a green, you have a 3/4 insect. At the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 green insect creature token for each +1/+1 counter you have put on creatures under your control this turn. This card is absolutely insane in this deck. So with Ezuri, if we put 5+1/+1, we have 5 experience counters. Go to combat. You put a 5 on Iridescent Hornbeetle or anything. At your end step, Iridescent Hornbeetle says, "Hey, I saw you put 5+1/+1 counters out. I'm gonna put 5 1/1 insects out onto the battlefield that trigger Ezuri." So Ezuri sees all of them enter. So now his 5 goes to 10, and then next turn you put 10 on something, and then Iridescent says, "Hey, you put 10 on something. I'm gonna put 10 more out," and then he sees all 10 enter. This card is absolutely insane, especially if you have something like Branching Evolution. Like that 10 is now 20. Then this thing sees 20. It gets absolutely insane. Next we have Mole Drifter. So for 4 and a blue, you get a 2/2 flyer, which triggers Ezuri. When it enters the battlefield, draw 2. You can evoke it for 2 and a blue. So it enters, triggers Ezuri, then dies, and then gets draw 2. It's a solid card. Next, we got Verdurous Gearhulk. So for 3 and 2 green, you get a 4/4 trample. The trample is relevant. When it enters the battlefield, distribute 4+1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. Yeah, this card's very good. Doesn't trigger Ezuri, but Branching Evolution, it goes like 2, 4, 6, 8. So it gets ridiculous. Next, we have Avenger of Zendikar. So for 5 and 2 green, you get a 5/5. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 0/1 plant creature token, which will trigger Ezuri. For each basic or for each land you control, not basic, each land, period. And then it has landfall. Whenever land enters, you get a +1. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. The +1/+1 counters are relevant, and the fact that it makes a bunch of little plants triggers Ezuri is also relevant. Next, we have Hornet Queen. This card gives us a lot of little insects with flying. It has flying. They all have death touch, and it's just more little things we can dump counters on. So for 4 and 3 green, you get a 2/2 flying death touch. When it enters, you get 4 1/1 insect creature tokens with death touch. When all 5 of these creatures enter, they all trigger Ezuri, and then you can dump them on the flyers. So it's very solid. Next, we have Enraze Forerunners. So for 5 and triple green, you get a 7/7 Vigilance, Trample Haste. When it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2, gain Vigilance, and Trample. This is usually enough to at least kill one player, if not multiple, or even win the game outright. The pigs are pretty good. And then for the last creature, we have Walking Ballista. So for XX, you get a X. So it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and then you can pay 4 and put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then remove a +1/+1 counter from it at any time, and it deals 1 damage to any target. So, you know, if Ezuri has 10 counters on it, and you have Branching Evolution, you put 20 on Walking Ballista, and at any time you can just shoot anything you want with Walking Ballista, and it just keeps growing. So Walking Ballista is very, very good in this deck. Lastly, we're gonna go to the lands. So first land we got Yavimaya Coast. Tap it for colorless or any color you want. It hurts you. You know, it's good. Rejuvenating Springs, essentially a dual land and commander multiplayer. You can't tutor for it, or you can't search for it with a fetch land, but other than that, it's basically a dual land. Next up, we got Hinterland Harbor. You know, it's a check land. If you have a island or a forest out, it comes out untapped. Very good. Next, we got Breeding Pool. So Shockland, pay 2 life for it, enter untapped, and you get a blue or green. Next, we have a Flip Land. So Tide Channel Pathway adds a green or a blue. It's very good. Next, we have Castle Garenbrig. So enters tapped unless you control forest. Tap it to add a green. Pay 2 and 2 green. Add 6 green mana to your mana pool, only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. You know, this card lets us get things like Hornet Queen out turn 3, turn 4. You know, it's really good. Next we got Command Tower. Commander Staple adds 1 of either green or blue because we're running Ezuri. Next we have Prismatic Vista. Lets us tutor for any basic land card, put it onto the battlefield untapped. So it's strictly better than an Evolving Wilds. Next we got Exotic Orchard. So it taps for any color an opponent could produce. So, I mean, we're in blue and green. There's absolutely 0 times I've ever played this deck, and there hasn't been a blue and a green player at the table. Like, someone's playing blue, someone's playing green. Like, this card will never not tap for both unless you just get really unlucky. Next, we have Command Beacon. This lets us get Ezuri back out if he's getting, you know, picked on because he's getting a little crazy and people want to keep him in check. You know, taps for a generic, or you can sacrifice it, put him from your command zone into your hand, so it lets you avoid that commander tax. Next, we have Karn's Bastion. So taps to add a generic, or we can pay 4, tap it, proliferate. You know, very good card, helps us grow our team. Next up, we got Scavenger Grounds. This keeps the graveyard decks in check. So adds a generic, pay 2, sacrifice a desert. It's a desert. Exile all cards from all graveyards. You know, anyone's getting a little crazy in their graveyard, just pop it, get rid of it. Next up's one of our win conditions, especially with the Sage of Hours, to show people, you know, we can just outright win. Tap that as generic, or pay 4, tap it, target creature can't be blocked this turn. You know, we're going to be dumping a lot of counters on creatures, and it's going to make them unblockable and guarantee them to get through. Next up, we got Alchemist Refuge. Tap it to add a generic, or pay Simic, tap it. You cast non-land cards this turn as though they have flash. That is very relevant. Makes it to where, you know, we can have little combat tricks or surprises up our sleeve. Next up, we got Field of Ruin. This lets us destroy other people's lands that are problematic. And then everyone gets a basic land. Next, we got Blinkmoth Nexus. This gives us a little flyer that we can dump counters on if we need a flyer. So you just dump all the counters on it and then swing in the air. So pretty good evasive card. Next up, we got 9 forests. And then we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We also run 9 islands. And, you know, overall, this deck's very fun to play. You know, people don't really respect it when they play against it, and that's really how you win. Because I mean, we're playing a lot of little dorks that people are just like, oh, you know, I don't really care about that. I'm gonna focus on something else, and then before you know it, Ezuri makes that 1-1, you know, a 12-12, and now that it's just starting to beat you down. Now the train's rolling. So, I would say, you know, it's a lot of fun. Just people overlook it, and that's probably its biggest strength is that people don't pay attention to it until it's too late. But yep, that's my Ezuri Claw Progress deck tech.